My 35th birthday detonated like a staged accident. Everyone applauded, no one noticed the fuse. I had suggested a quiet dinner, medium rare steak, a good bottle, a few close people. Sarah vetoed that and booked a spectacle. 50 bodies, sparkling glasses, and a live-streaming friend named Tiffany who considered sincerity an optional filter. The apartment was mine. The guest list was hers. Negotiations ended the moment she smiled and said, "Trust me." A week before the event, she cornered me with that look people give when they're about to announce something calculated and inevitable. "About your present," she said. I blinked. "You bought me a gift?" I asked, baffled. She laughed, the laugh that meant the joke wasn't for me. "No, babe. The gift you're giving me." "Somebody else's breathless audience," she explained. "Tiffany would be recording. I want something shiny to open." People love that it was less a request than a public relations briefing. I am not a sentimental fool. I am, by trade, someone who walks into chaos and draws a tidy map. My day job is crisis management, disasters, failed states, logistics that belong in nightmares. I assess risks, cut lines of failure, and relocate people and resources before things get worse. After a long tour in an actual disaster zone, I returned brittle and exhausted. Sarah was an easy remedy. Not romance so much as rest. Pretty photos, brunch friends, an endless stream of curated small talk. Her orbit was shallow, but harmless enough while I rebooted. When she asked me to fund a prop for her vanity, I didn't argue. It was data. The party was purpose-built banality. People shoved cocktails into their hands and emptiness into the conversation. I smiled the polite host's smile while I calculated mundane supply chains in my head. Sarah didn't give me even the pretense of a birthday note. I was funding the hors d'oeuvres and nothing else. Then Tiffany, with the precision of a trained predator, called the room to attention. "Okay, everyone. Time for Sarah's gift." Sarah's face lit like a billboard. I handed her the box. Inside was not the expected glint of something expensive. Inside was a battered, lovingly restored copy of The Wind in the Willows, the single thing I had kept from my mother. I'd had it repaired and had written a short private note on the flyleaf. "For the journeys we haven't taken yet." Her smile stuttered for a heartbeat when she saw the book, then smoothed. She hoisted it for Tiffany's camera and said, sweet and sharp at once, "A book. How thoughtful. But this is why I can't wait to upgrade." The room roared. My role shifted from passive observer to active operator in an instant. That laugh was a detonator. The social structure I'd been tolerating had just declared me obsolete. I blew out my candle, one small gesture, ceremonial and final, left the cake, and walked straight to my office where the scene could be broken down and dealt with. Crisis protocol isn't melodrama, it's movement. Secure the vital, cut the feeds, establish a new command post. I logged into email and sent a curt 30-day notice to the landlord, CC'd my lawyer, and made sure the lease and the burden of moving would not land on me. I handled the paperwork like a containment operation. The final month was paid, but the keys and the exit would be Sarah's problem. Next, I severed the pipelines. Sarah had authorized user status on my cards. 5 minutes later, she didn't. I rerouted paychecks into a new account and locked out every route that supplied her lifestyle. I packed the essentials, phone, laptop, documents, a small bag I kept for emergencies, and moved to an anonymous fallback apartment I'd leased months before under a corporate name. A good manager always has a fallback. From that quiet, sterile perch, I began the next phase, mapping the hostile network that sustained her. Tiffany was the hub, an influencer with the charisma of an advertisement and the empathy of a closed tab. For months I'd cataloged patterns in her online life, the inconsistencies and the obvious grease that lubricated her image. Her biggest signal, and therefore her biggest weakness, was a fundraiser she'd been promoting with Shakespearean sincerity. The website had professional photos, heavy copy appeal, and a PayPal link that funneled donations to a personal account. It smelled like an amateur grift. I drafted a dossier, screenshots, a money trail, receipts of follower purchases, and records of return fraud that hinted at a wider scam. I did not post it into the wind. Public executions are messy, targeted strikes are surgical. I decided who needed to see which piece, and how to deliver it so the cascade would be efficient, inevitable, and contained. The hits were calibrated and quiet. Tripped levers, not explosions. I parceled the dossier into 3 envelopes of trouble. One to a local investigative reporter who'd made a name exposing online fraud, one to the charity regulators with a clean, factual cover note, and one, deliberately blunt, to Tiffany's father. People with fragile empires keep one hand over their reputations. I wanted him to put his hand where the light was coming from. Next, I dealt with the supporting cast. Madison at the bank had a career that depended on the perception of discretion. A few well-timed screenshots of her weekend persona in full bloom made the compliance office very curious. I sent the package with no signature and nothing inflammatory, just public posts, captionless, leaving them to form their own judgment. The bank did what banks do in the presence of uncertainty. They pulled her out of client-facing roles and began a quiet review. Richard, the upgrade candidate, was a softer target. He had very little to hide but a lot to lose in a divorce gone sideways. I didn't need to smear him. I only needed to make his team uncomfortable. An anonymous link to the clip of Sarah's flippant upgrade comment landed in his lawyer's inbox. The lawyer, professional and hungry for leverage, forwarded it to whoever needed to know. Suddenly, Sarah was a variable in someone else's negotiation. 2 days later, the first article dropped. The reporter I'd chosen had a knack for readable brutality. She laid out a trail of marketing language and empty promises. The animal shelter that never had animals. The donation button that sent money to a personal account. The influencer promises that led to nowhere. Tiffany's face filled multiple screens. She tried to answer with a video where she promised full transparency. The video read like someone learning how to cry on cue. Her father issued a statement distancing himself. Her brand partnerships evaporated overnight. The social structure that had protected Sarah collapsed in hours. Texts leaked when alliances turned. I watched as friends I'd met at parties, the same people who'd clinked glasses with fake enthusiasm, began to pick sides. Many of them chose self-preservation. Phone calls to me were frantic and thin, laced with blame and pleading, but my line was closed. I had severed the lifelines. Without credit, without cosigns, without a safety net, Sarah's hub lost traction. She scrambled. She tried to qualify for the lease on her own. She failed. The landlord filed formal notice. Her social life, once performed like a polished monologue, fractured into panicked messages and canceled brunches. Madison's HR call put a professional probation on her record. Richard's circle received the clip and, either warned or embarrassed, they stepped back. The final indignity was not public shaming so much as the quiet eradication of the scaffolding she'd taken for granted. I did not gloat. There was no private victory dance in the fallback apartment. Victory tastes like cold coffee in an empty kitchen. What I did feel was the clarity of disposal, the same clinical satisfaction you get from removing an infection. I had acted on indicators and taken preemptive action. It was brutal, but it was surgical. For weeks I maintained radio silence. The operative instinct is to observe outcomes without interference. Correction lessens when the system is allowed to collapse under its own rot. I returned to work, to clients who required clean thinking and absolute focus. I read the repaired pages of The Wind in the Willows in the evenings, a strange, tender ritual that reminded me of why I'd kept anything at all. Then, the day she reappeared, I was in the lobby of my office building checking messages. She had been waiting for me there for hours. She looked like someone who had been winnowed down by circumstance. Statements that had once been sharp were now ragged and unsure. The designer clothes hung on her like props that had been stripped of paint. Her eyes were a map of apologies. She spoke the expected script. Sorry, mistakes, influence, love, please let me fix this. She asked for another chance with the kind of pleading that was equal parts personal and performative. I listened without interrupting. My training teaches that you listen to collect, to understand the intent, the resources, the weak points. What she offered with trembling sincerity was sorrow. What I needed was assurance the risk would not recur. When she finished, I took a breath and said nothing rash. I showed her a picture on my phone, a satellite shot of a town after a mudslide I'd managed recovery for. I pointed to the raw edges of the landscape, the places that had been obliterated and the clean lines where shelters were built afterward. This is how I think, I said. You don't get to be a continuing liability in my life. Not professionally and not personally. Her face shifted through stages. Hope, confusion, then dawning horror as she realized this was not about hurt feelings. This was a professional assessment. She had been the principal operator in a systemic instability, and I had neutralized the threat. She clutched at the idea of what she had lost. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. The question was honest in a way that made me almost pity her. I could have handed her instructions, a bailout, a bridge loan, a chance to rebuild under supervision. Instead, I opted for a simpler, colder lesson. "You've got a learning opportunity," I said. "You learned what happens when you treat people like placeholders. You learned that there are consequences to reducing relationships to status updates. That's not nothing." She left the lobby with that tiny scrap of dignity kept like a talisman. I watched her go and felt nothing like triumph. I felt the steady, remote satisfaction of a mission completed. I had secured my person, my assets, and my peace. I had removed a glaring source of risk, and the environment around me, once noisy and precarious, quieted into a manageable hum. But quiet is not the end. The fallout rippled on. Tiffany's legal troubles deepened, lawsuits and investigations blossoming into weeks of chaos. The friends who remained whispered about loyalty and consequences in private threads that I did not read. Sarah moved back to her parents' house. She took a job in a cafe that turned her days into something ordinary and, for the first time in a long while, uncurated. I thought that would be the final closure. I was wrong. I thought moving into her apartment would bring clarity, maybe even stability. Instead, it became a museum of everything that wasn't mine. Her framed degrees lined the walls, while my proudest achievements, things like winning a debate in school or fixing an old car, felt too insignificant to display. Her space was decorated in bold strokes, like an artist who knew exactly what colors defined her. Mine had always been temporary, borrowed, fading into the background. I unpacked my boxes slowly, careful not to disturb the arrangement of her life, as if even my belongings needed permission to exist there. She had this ritual of lighting candles at night, filling the air with lavender and smoke. It should have been calming, but instead it made me feel like I was constantly intruding on someone else's performance. When she played music, she chose songs that spoke about freedom, ambition, living without chains. I'd hum along, but inside, I couldn't help wondering, was she trying to remind me of something I lacked, or was it a warning that she could leave anytime she pleased? Every dinner with her friends turned into a subtle test I didn't realize I'd agreed to take. They'd laugh about trips abroad, career milestones, dreams they were manifesting. I'd nod and smile, but the silence inside me grew louder. I became the background noise in conversations that were too big for me, like static in a room full of symphonies. She noticed it too, I think. Sometimes her hand would find mine under the table, her fingers tightening as if to say, "Stay with me. Don't drift away." But the truth is, I was already drifting. My nights stretched longer. I'd wander the streets, pretending I was headed somewhere important, when really I just couldn't face the feeling of being a guest in my own life. She'd call, her voice carrying a mix of worry and irritation, asking why I was late again. I'd mumble excuses, traffic, work, errands. But the real reason was harder to confess. I didn't know how to be enough for someone who seemed to have it all. One night, it rained hard, the kind of storm that makes the city feel like it's breaking apart. I stood outside our building, drenched, staring at the warm light coming from our window. Inside, she moved gracefully, pouring wine into 2 glasses, waiting for me like I was a character late to his own scene. I couldn't bring myself to walk in. My legs were heavy, my chest tighter than the soaked shirt clinging to my skin. I stood there until she finally spotted me. She waved, smiling, but all I could do was stand still like a stranger spying on someone else's life. That night we argued. Not loudly, not with shouting, but in sharp, quiet sentences that cut deeper than any scream could. She accused me of pulling away, of living with her body but not her heart. I said I felt invisible. She looked at me, eyes full of something between pity and disbelief, and whispered, "Maybe you want to be invisible." I didn't answer, because part of me feared she was right. Days after that argument blurred together in a strange rhythm. We still shared meals, still exchanged pleasantries, but the warmth had drained out of the routine. She started working later hours, or maybe she just stayed away to avoid me. I found myself cooking for one, staring at her empty chair as if it might suddenly fill itself. I tried distracting myself with small projects, fixing the loose cabinet door, reorganizing the bookshelf, but everything felt temporary, like rearranging furniture in a house that wasn't mine to keep. One evening, I came home to find her on the balcony, cigarette in hand. She rarely smoked. It was something she'd said she quit years ago. The sight unsettled me. The glow of the ember reflected off her face, making her look both distant and fragile. When she noticed me, she didn't hide it. She just exhaled and said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living with a ghost." I wanted to argue, to tell her I was real, that I was here. But I knew she wasn't wrong. I'd been haunting my own life, lingering but not living. It was around that time she introduced me to her brother. He was everything I wasn't: confident, loud, magnetic. At dinner, he told stories that had everyone laughing, even the waiters at the table next to us. When the check came, he insisted on paying, brushing off my attempt with a joke about how I'd better save my money for a rainy day. I laughed along, but the sting lingered. Later that night, she told me how proud she was of him, how he always knew how to light up a room. I nodded, but deep down, I wondered if she ever wished I could do the same. The distance grew heavier, not just between us, but inside me. I started sleeping on the couch more often, claiming I didn't want to wake her when I came in late. Truthfully, it was easier not to share the same bed when silence was louder than intimacy. Sometimes I'd wake up in the early hours and see her standing in the doorway just watching me. I could never tell if it was out of love or disappointment. Then came the night everything shifted. We had gone to a small gathering with her friends. They were kind enough, but every joke, every story, felt like another reminder of the worlds I didn't belong to. At some point, she introduced me as the guy who keeps me grounded. Everyone chuckled, nodding in approval. But the phrase echoed in my head long after. Grounded, heavy, stuck, like I wasn't a partner, but a weight she carried with her. On the walk home, I couldn't hold it in. I asked her if that's really how she saw me. She brushed it off at first, saying it was just a joke, but when I pressed, her silence told me everything. We walked the rest of the way in silence, the city buzzing around us, mocking our quiet. That night, lying awake on the couch, I realized something brutal. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was afraid of admitting I'd already lost myself. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. For a second, I thought maybe things were normal again. She was at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen. She slid a mug toward me without looking up. It felt less like an act of care and more like a gesture of habit. We drank in silence, the air thick with words that neither of us dared to say. I spent that day wandering. I told her I had errands, but really, I just needed to disappear. I walked through the city, past places we'd once gone together when everything felt lighter. Bookstores, cafes, the little park where she laughed so hard at something I said that strangers turned to smile at us. Back then, it felt like we were writing a story together. Now it felt like I was a footnote in hers. When I finally returned home, the apartment was dark. A single note lay on the counter. "We need to talk." Tomorrow, my chest tightened. Tomorrow. Not tonight. Not now. She needed time or maybe courage to say what had been hanging between us for weeks. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the building sounding like a countdown. The next day, she didn't wait long. She sat across from me, hands folded, her eyes steady but heavy. "I don't think this is working," she said. No hesitation, no searching for the right words. She had rehearsed this. I wanted to ask if she meant us, or me, or the life we'd tried to build. But I knew the answer. It was all of it. I tried to fight it at first. I listed the things we'd done together, the memories, the laughter. I promised change, promised I could be better, stronger, more present. She listened quietly, and when I finished, she said softly, "I don't want a promise. I want a person." That sentence broke something in me, because deep down, I knew she was right. I'd been offering pieces of myself, fragments, apologies, but never the whole. I'd been so afraid of being unworthy that I never allowed myself to just be. We didn't yell. We didn't cry. It was the calmest breakup I'd ever imagined. She went to pack a bag for the night, said she'd give me space to figure out when I'd move out. As she closed the door behind her, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was final. I walked through the apartment, touching the things we'd shared, the life we'd tried to stitch together. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was intruding. I felt like I was already gone. The days that followed were strangely quiet. I stayed in the apartment for a week, packing slowly, almost ritualistically. Each item I put into a box felt like a confession, proof of a life I had tried to fit into but never fully claimed. Her bookshelves looked emptier without my dog-eared paperbacks wedged between her neat hardcovers. The bathroom counter looked cleaner without my razor tossed carelessly by the sink. With every box sealed, the space became more hers again, and less hours. She came by once, just to check in. We didn't talk much. She asked if I needed help, and I shook my head. There was a kindness in her voice, but also relief. I realized then that she wasn't angry at me. She was just tired of carrying something I couldn't hold myself. When moving day came, I didn't make a scene. No dramatic goodbyes. No pleas for another chance. I loaded my boxes into the back of a borrowed car, and when I turned for one last look at the building, I felt an odd mixture of grief and freedom. I wasn't leaving her behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had tried so hard to disappear inside her shadow. The first night alone in my new place was hard. The walls were bare, the silence sharp, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on my own ground. No one else's furniture, no one else's music, no one else's light defining me. Just me, raw and unpolished, with space to figure out who I really was. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. Maybe in passing, maybe never. But she'll always be the person who held up a mirror and forced me to face the emptiness I carried. She didn't save me, and maybe she wasn't meant to. She simply reminded me that being loved isn't enough if you refuse to exist fully in that love. And so I begin again. Alone, yes, but for the first time, not invisible.